regular polls that we do with the Bar Association. They're sponsored locally by the King County Bar, and I think the Supreme Court, or excuse me, the Illinois State Bar does them as well. You consistently get superior ratings from the Bar Associations. What do you attribute that to? Why do you think you're such a well-respected judge by all the attorneys that come before you?
Thank you for that question. It's very kind. It was extremely gratifying to me to have those ratings because as a judge, one of the things that we don't get very often is feedback. You can imagine that although every single day I have people in front of me who rightfully or wrongfully may throw up their hands and act like they completely disagree with whatever I say, which is fine because that's anyone's ability to do in front of the bench. You don't get a true picture of whether people think that you're doing well or not. We get a chance to think very hard, we work very hard, we try our best to make great decisions, and then you don't know necessarily what other people think. And so it was actually wonderful and a little nerve-wracking to have polls sent out to all the attorneys and then have them have a chance to respond anonymously to say what they think about you. I'm not going to pretend to know what I think everyone else judges a judge on. I only know that when I was filling these out or when I fill them out for other people, I think that what attorneys look for is judges who are working as hard as they do. You don't want to go into a courtroom after having worked really hard on behalf of your client, after having spent a ton of time researching and writing a motion on an issue that's important to you and important to your client, and walk in and have the judge not have read it or not have paid as much attention and worked as hard to understand the issues as you do. So I think that's one thing that I went into this with after having practiced for a long time is I always want to be the judge who's prepared and who's going to work as hard with the attorneys to try to resolve the cases as best I can. I think I've also been really lucky in working at the state's attorney's office and working on both sides of cases to really have a lot of interaction with the public and be able to understand, first of all, that the things that are happening in court are not personal to me. So although a lot of people may be frustrated with the issues, they may be frustrated with the emotions, they may be frustrated with even my ruling on something, that it's my job to try to explain it as best I can and to not let that bother me. I think people appreciate that I'm able to talk to people without necessarily having some of the bad temperament issues that I think other personalities might have, just because you're taking it personally when people get upset with you. I think that just because of my experience, I'm kind of able to remove myself from that. Other than that, I can't tell you that I know why. I'm just very happy that the ratings are what they are.
Yeah, I can tell you from my perspective on the other side of the bench what I think makes a good judge, and I think you certainly qualify for this. And that is when you go into a hearing as a lawyer and you feel that you were heard and the judge thought about it, even if you don't win that hearing, even though the ruling may be disappointing, as long as you feel the judge gave it a fair shake and weighed the relative merits of the arguments, both sides, I think that's what most lawyers really want. And I think you do that, and I think that's a tribute.
Well, thank you. I'm lucky. I'm one of those people that I just really enjoy thinking things through and trying to figure out why things are the way they are in the law. I think for the most part, our law and legal system does have a lot of logic to it and a lot of fairness built in, but you have to think it through really hard. I guess I will say I also found as a young lawyer that worried me when I would step in front of the bench and you felt that the judge was friendly with one side or looked at one side differently than the other because of a personal relationship or anything. And so I think that's something I've tried really hard to do is, whether I know someone or not, whether I recognize them, whether I've had personal contacts with them, it doesn't really matter. I mean, when you really think about it, it doesn't matter what personal relationship you may have with any person in the courtroom. What really matters is what the facts are and what the law is. And so I try to stick to that.
As it should be. You have a wide-ranging realm of experience. And so I want to kind of walk through a little bit about your background and how you got to the spot where you're at right now. You're a hometown hero, is that correct?
I'm a local girl. I grew up in Elgin, yeah.
You grew up in Elgin, and you went to high school in Elgin?
So I went to public schools. I went to middle school, elementary school, middle school, and high school, all in Elgin. I'm a graduate of Larkin High back in '88. And then kind of stayed local. I went down to University of Illinois for undergrad. I was a finance major and then ended up actually staying there for law school. It was a really good school. It was a great bargain, a little bit more 20 years ago, 25 years ago than it is now. But yeah, and then ended up coming right back here to work.
So 7 years in Champaign-Urbana.
Yes, yes. It was a little, it felt a little long. I haven't visited a lot after being there for 7 years, but it was a great place to get an education. It
Yeah,
really was.
for sure.
It helped me. I put myself through law school. So because I had gone there as an undergrad, I had some contacts to get jobs. I was able to be a teaching assistant in law school, and so that helped as well.
So at what point in your undergrad or even before did you decide that law might be a career for you? What was it that got you interested in being a lawyer?
Yeah, it's funny when I think back, it's hard to remember sometimes what you thought about when you were young. I mean, I was lucky. My parents always encouraged us for education and to think about working in some capacity. I feel like especially in my undergraduate time, when you have so much time on your hands, I feel like I was really focused on trying to figure out who I was and what my skills were and what I liked and what kind of lifestyle I wanted to have. And it kind of ended up, so I tried a bunch of different things. I thought about teaching. I really wanted a career. I kept thinking, well, if I'm going to do something, when you're young, it sounds like a really long time. If I'm going to work at something for 40 or more years, 8 hours a day for 5 days a week, I wanted it to be something that I felt make a difference. I thought about teaching because I still love teaching. I thought for a minute about doing something in the medical profession until I took a college level chemistry course and quickly found out that was not my strength. I loved philosophy and thinking and trying to think through problems and try to find the solution, but I wanted something that was going to be more practical. And so I guess kind of thinking about myself and thinking about my strengths and thinking about my values, it kind of ended up honing in on law school. That was something that had been in the back of my mind from fiction. I'm an avid reader and I really like crime novels and legal novels, but I didn't really know that it was for me until I kind of got further down the road.
Scott Turow has a new novel coming out.
I think I'm going to have to pick that up. Yeah. He's one of my favorites.
So did you like law school? Be honest.
Not really. Yeah. I have found I had many moments of doubts during law school. I think what helped get me through it is I really went to law school. So I had this idea that I wanted to have a career that made a difference. So I went to law school with the intent of being a prosecutor. And maybe that was from some of those Scott Turow novels. But I went and I had to kind of beg and borrow to let the Champaign County State's Attorney's Office just have me volunteer. You couldn't really be an intern until your second year of law school, but they let me volunteer just helping with orders of protection my first year and just getting into the atmosphere and seeing what the prosecutor's office was like kind of helped me stay focused in law school on what I was there for, because the process of law school was so different. It wasn't super enjoyable to me.
So you liked the courtroom, obviously. When you were an intern, you got inspired by that, it sounds like.
I did. I was really lucky to have as a mentor a woman who actually was one of the Champaign County Assistant State's Attorneys, and she actually ended up later becoming a judge, and she's retiring this summer, which is amazing to me. But she was just wonderful. She was a whiz in the courtroom. She was personable with people. She cared about working for the right reasons. She was smart. She was competent. She was well respected, but very grounded and approachable. And she just kind of gave me an idea of the path that I wanted to take.
Yeah, it's interesting how a friend of mine calls us accidental tourists, how we run into somebody and they shape our career or focus us in a particular direction. It sounds like she helped you figure out what you wanted to do.
She did. And I think that that's one thing that can be important too. And even in today's world, finding that person that you connect with or feel that you see yourself in. And so I have to say, I think frankly, the fact that she was a woman and doing this and forging this path kind of helped me see where I could go in the future. Not that I didn't have many men that I've learned from along the way, many that are wonderful and have been mentors to me, but I think it kind of helps you see somebody that you identify with in the roles as well.
Absolutely. So you were pretty well focused on getting out and becoming a prosecutor right out of law school.
Yep, yep.
Did you consider private practice ever, or?
You know what I did? I was lucky to intern also in law school. So the only bad thing about the Champaign County State's Attorney's Office is I worked there for free. So I mostly worked 3 or 4 other jobs on the side to make money because I was putting myself through school. So I did everything from being a personal assistant, like I said, being a teaching assistant for business law. I was a cocktail waitress. And one of the paying jobs I got was at a local law firm. They were actually working on breast implant litigation, class action litigation at the time. It didn't appeal to me as much at the time. I found the litigation in the prosecutor's office just to be more exciting and something, that the nice thing about that is you kind of start in and get your feet wet right away. And I enjoyed that process.
It's a great opportunity for a new lawyer to go to court.
Yes. Yeah. Sometimes a little too fast, it feels like, but there you are.
What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, I guess.
Exactly.
Where did you first start working? Where was your first job after you passed the bar?
Yeah, so I was lucky. I had the state's attorney's office kind of made me an offer. So I actually started working at the state's attorney's office, not as a full lawyer. So I took the bar at the end of July. I got married at the end of August. And as soon as I got back from my honeymoon, I started working at the state's attorney's office. I took the bar exam in November, and I was actually down at prosecutor school in Springfield, already working the day that the bar exam results came out. So it could have gone bad if I didn't pass.
Dodge that bullet.
Yes.
So you started in Kane County or Champaign County?
So I had gone to school down in Champaign and was interning there, but I was lucky in the summer I came up and got an internship as a 7-Eleven where I was able to go into court. The summer after my second year, I started working in the summer at the Kane County State's Attorney's Office. And then I was lucky that due to that, they kind of gave me an offer upon graduation. So I came back up here to work.
Ah, got it. So you came home.
I did.
And what was your favorite part about being a prosecutor?
I loved prosecution. The reason I chose prosecution, that side of the courtroom, is I love the fact that as a prosecutor that your job in the courtroom is to do the right thing. So you're not really being a paid voice for any one side. What I liked about that is that really your job is to represent the people. So if representing the people means that you discover along the way that you do not have enough evidence, it's your responsibility to either reduce the charges or to dismiss charges. You're not being paid just to prosecute people. You're being paid to try to do what's fair and what's right. And I loved feeling that responsibility, and also feeling I was very lucky to have bosses that gave us the freedom to do what we thought was right in the courtroom. So it gave me an opportunity to serve my community in a way that I felt was appropriate, and I really liked that.
So starting out, you probably did what, traffic court or routine stuff, and did you move into felonies at some point?
Yeah, so I started, like you said, they start everybody in traffic court because that's where you can do the least amount of harm. And you get a chance to really work on a wide variety of cases. And then the first opportunity that I had to move from traffic court, I took, and it was working at the Kane County Child Advocacy Center, which ended up being probably my toughest and most rewarding assignment along the way. They handled at the time only the serious physical and sexual abuse of children. So it was a team approach where we worked with the Department of Children and Family Services, a caseworker, and then the police department, and then the prosecutor all worked together to try to make sure that any child who could have been a victim only had one interview, that whether we needed to bring an abuse neglect case because the child was not being protected in their home, whether we needed to bring a felony case against the accused, whether the perpetrator was sometimes a minor and we needed to bring a delinquency case, we handled all of that. So it actually turned out that the very first felony jury trial I ever did was a Class X case putting on a 5 and a 7-year-old on the stand. It was sexual abuse by the person who at the time was their minister. So it was definitely out of the frying pan and into the fire. But it was very hard. It was very rewarding.
How was your sleep in those days?
It was tough sometimes. I think the hardest thing to learn as a lawyer is that you don't always have control over the outcome of the case. You can't control the evidence. You can't control what people say. So it was losing those cases was heartbreaking when when it happened. It didn't always happen.
And you do your best, and that's all you can do, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
So at some point you moved into the civil division of the state's attorney's office. Is that right?
Yeah, so after I prosecuted the child abuse cases, and then I moved into general felonies, and I was a supervisor, and I started kind of wanting another challenge, but I loved working for the state and having an opportunity to be in public service. So I moved over to the civil division of the state's attorney's office, which most people, when I asked to do it, I think they were surprised because not many people did that. It's kind of the in-house law firm for the county. So it was a whole different way of working in the law. We mostly defended cases when people tried to sue the government. And then we advised the county officials and the county board on employment law, election law, tax law, anything that they needed to know, we would research and look up and find an answer for them.
What a great springboard, truly, for somebody who wants to be a judge, only because you handled the criminal side of the law as well as the civil side before you became a judge.
Yeah, I didn't think about that at the time. I was just thinking about what I like to do, but it ended up being great. And then, like I said, it was nice because there's a very distinct, I think, difference between being a prosecutor or being a plaintiff's lawyer and having to build your case and having to fulfill your burden of proof and all of that, and then being the defense side where you learn that all of the issues regarding discovery and representing the interest of your client and looking at it from a different point of view. Maybe you feel sometimes that a lawsuit was brought for the purposes of harassment and you're trying to figure out how to defend your client against that. So it ended up being very good training ground, but that wasn't my thought process at the time.
So just for people that are viewing that may not be lawyers, civil cases would be like a breach of contract case or an employment discrimination case or things of that nature, right?
Right. So we dealt with, I dealt with an issue where the Judicial Center roof, we brought a lawsuit against several different parties alleging that there was a defect in the material used for the Judicial Center roof, which ended up involving the architects and involving the manufacturer of the product. It ended up being environmental issues because we found out that lead had leached into the groundwater. I worked on personal injury cases when people were involved in traffic accidents and they thought that maybe the county had not designed a road correctly or that their construction crews had put up signs that had caused something or not protected someone. A lot of what I did was working on federal civil rights cases when people would sue the sheriff's department. So that was really interesting. I got a chance to go to federal court for that.
See, I was never a prosecutor, but I would think that would be the best job, doing the civil side of it. But I'm a civil lawyer, so.
Yeah, it was wonderful work. I really enjoyed all of it. Yeah, it was a great place to be. And it was an old courthouse in Geneva, which was wonderful.
Right. Judge Bush was talking about moving family court over there about 4 years ago. Never happened. I would have liked it.
Yeah, it's a place to be.
So at what point did you start to think about, maybe I'd like to be a judge? At what point did that start to cross your consciousness?
It never came to my mind specifically until someone mentioned it to me. Actually, it was Judge Brown, who I appeared in front of in civil court arguing several motions. And he kind of just said to me one time when I saw him outside of court, have you ever thought about applying to be a judge? Because I think there was an application open at the time. And my first response was, no, I never thought about that. But when I did start thinking about it, it kind of had all the same attributes of everything that I already liked. I loved, when I was in the state's attorney's office and I was in criminal and then in civil, I loved being able to learn new areas of the law. I loved having the opportunity to serve the public. I liked having the chance, like I said before, to do what I thought was right. And I think, I'm sure you've had this feeling, I think any lawyer that steps in front of judges every day during their career at some point sometimes thinks like, well, I could do that. I think we all have that thought cross our mind. But the more I thought about the type of work it was and what it entailed, I thought that it would be something I would really enjoy and something that would be really useful to put a lot of time and energy into for a career. I just thought it was a job that makes a big difference, and that was really attractive to me.
So would you come home from work that day and say to your husband, "Hey, I'm going to be a judge"?
Yeah, if it was that easy. Actually, the funniest thing is, when the year that I thought about doing that, we had a surprise. My second daughter, I became pregnant just as I was filling out my application, so I held off for a year. Um, and then it was a long process because to become an associate judge, you have to apply. The circuit judges appoint the associate judges. At the time that I was applying, there were 16 circuit judges. Many of them knew me because I had worked in the county for so long, but many of them didn't, just for whatever reason. And a lot of people want to become a judge. So you have to go around and interview with and apply to basically 16 different personalities who have 16 different value structures and try to convince them that you're the right person. So it's kind of a process. It usually takes people several years, and it did. I think it took me about 5 years of applying.
Yeah, every time there's a vacancy for associate judge, don't they have like 30 names, 30 people that put in for it?
Yeah, usually it's somewhere between 25 and 40. I think during the times I was applying, it seemed like there was a lot of times that there was between 30 and 40.
So at the point that you were appointed, that had to be thrilling. That had to be quite an honor.
Yes, I will never forget getting that phone call. I actually happened to be at home that day. I had taken the day off, and yeah, I think I just put down the phone and took a gigantic breath. I couldn't believe it. Yeah.
How exciting. And so where did you first sit? What was your first assignment?
So yeah, I got the call from Judge Braca that I was appointed, and told my husband and my kids. And actually, it was funny. My youngest daughter was 5 at the time that I was appointed, because that was the one that I had been pregnant with at first. And her comment to me was, "Mom, I think you'll make a good judge because most of you are really nice, but sometimes you're a little bit mean, and you have to be a little bit mean to be a judge."
Probably true.
So she probably knew more than I would have thought at age 5. But yeah, so they have judges do the same as attorneys. They start you where you can do the least amount of harm. So I started in traffic court, which was good because I had worked there before.
And so during your, let's say your first year, were there ever times that you said, I want to go back to the state's attorney's office. This is not for me, or were you a natural? Did you take to it right away?
I think it takes a little while to grow into the position. I remember several months or maybe even a year or so into it where, you can get very stressed out about, especially in traffic court, the volume of people and the number of people you're trying to answer to, and trying to do things consistently and trying to make sure that you can explain things to the public. I found out right away that you have to be very direct, that you have to be very decisive. You can't be wishy-washy because then everyone will keep arguing with you. And one time I looked around and I finally realized, like, well, I guess frankly what I say goes. And it was surprising to me because you don't usually have that type of authority in a situation. But learning to use that authority, learning when to push things, when to hold back, when to try to be patient, when to take a break and to set something over for ruling, and when you just need to make a decision right then. I think it takes a little while to figure all of that out. I remember the biggest thing in traffic court is it took me a while to get used to talking nonstop all day long. It was exhausting. It took a little while to build up an endurance for that.
So the skill set is definitely different than when you're practicing law.
Yeah, I would say that I kind of got used to the pace of law, especially in the civil division, where you're building a case and you know the direction that you want to take the case, and you're always working towards one goal. And being a judge is much more a reaction. So you walk into court and you're constantly having things thrown at you from every direction. And it's just getting your feet under you and figuring out how to react in each situation, what's the best course. Once you've had everything thrown at you one time, then you've done it before, and then you can be that much more efficient and knowledgeable and better at it the next time it comes. But whenever you're in a new call, just figuring out the pace and figuring out the issues takes a little while.
So it's the chief judge in the circuit who assigns you to a particular place, correct?
Right.
And do they consult with you? Do they ask you where you want to go? Or do they just say, you fit in good here, I think you'd be really great in this court?
I think it depends on the chief judge. So after I had been in traffic for about 2.5 years or so, that's when Judge Susan Bowles was the new chief judge. And she did ask everyone upon coming in if they wanted to move, if they thought about moving, which courtrooms would they like to consider themselves that they'd like to go to. I think then they fill in probably by seniority or by people that have a strong affinity or background to a certain courtroom. I was still a fairly new associate at the time, but I did actually ask to go to the family division. It was an area of law I'd always been interested in and did not have a ton of experience in. And I really felt like it was something that I needed to learn because it touches so many other courtrooms and aspects of people's lives.
And you've been in that division how long now?
So I'm going on my 5th year. I think I'm in my 5th year. I started in January of 2016. So it's been about 4.5 years right now.
So when I first started practicing in 1985, there was a general cycle where the judges would move out of family court after 3 years.
Hmm.
And we don't really do that anymore. And the reason that we did it then was burnout.
Right.
Just listening to all the hollering and emotions all day long. How do you temper that? How do you manage that? It's tough.
It can be. The first year, I think I had a harder time with it. I wasn't used to just the intensity, I think, of people's emotions. I think I've learned now, I tend to go home and I take a walk after work right away. It helps me to get outside and just get away a little bit without looking at my phone and without looking at other things. Now that I've gotten to know the issues and gotten to know the personalities more, and the family bar is wonderful. It's not as stressful being in court as it is when everything's a little bit new and rushed. So I think I've gotten a little bit more patient with myself. So I'm a big exerciser. I always have been. It's kind of the way I deal with stress. So I started even in high school and then kept it up through law school. So I'm a runner. I swim. I do yoga. So that's kind of the thing that usually keeps me sane and helps me burn off some stress. So those things all help.
So I imagine, I don't know this to be the case, but I imagine child custody or parental responsibility issues are harder to deal with than money. Is that true?
For the most part, I mean, so I was glad to have a finance background. I am not an expert as much as some of the people that appear before me. But I've had some really challenging, I think one of the first big hearings I had involved, I was looking through corporate tax returns, and it was all kinds of issues that I hadn't had to deal with before. But the ones that I think about at night, the ones that I think about when I'm swimming laps or when I'm walking the dog, or just as I'm driving around, or that I might talk to my husband about, are almost always the child custody cases, or if somebody wants to move out of state and how are you going to handle parenting if someone moves away. Those type of issues are the hardest ones before I make a ruling on them.
Do you remember Tom Hogan?
Yes, yes.
So one day I was talking to Judge Hogan about how hard child custody cases were. And he said, no, they're easy. And I said, they're easy? That's kind of counterintuitive. He goes, look, I either have 2 good parents, in which case it doesn't matter what I do, or I have 2 bad parents, in which case it doesn't matter what I do, or I have 1 far superior parent, then it's easy. I said, oh.
Yeah, I've heard that, but I haven't found that to be true, personally.
No. I can't imagine anybody, I hope he was joking with me. I think he probably was, but it's easier on our side of the bench to be an advocate
Yeah.
than on your side of the bench to have to make the final decision. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think that you just want so much, you understand how much it means to everyone, and you want so much to try to do the best you can with the circumstances that you have, that I try to put a lot of time and effort and thought into it, because it's, it's the most important thing to most people. It would be to me.
And what is your process? So you sit through a trial and you write notes. Walk us through that, how that works?
Sure. So to do a ruling, I try to take 3 or 4 steps back. So, and I kind of did the same thing when I would be working on a big summary judgment motion or something. I'll sit down and first of all, I take pretty copious notes. I'm pretty good. I've got my own, if not, shorthand, but my own way of taking notes. So I tend to take question answer notes where I've got most of the testimony down. I've got in the margins, I put the exhibits or questions that I might have. But I have a pretty full set of notes. And so I will go through and I'll read all of my notes just to kind of get a first impression. And on the side, I might make notes as I'm reading through it of what I think the important issues or the important parts of the testimony are. And then I'll go back and I'll read the law. And just to remind myself, sometimes it's good to take a step back and just remember what exactly the burden of proof is and what exactly the factors are. And then I'll usually kind of walk around with it for a little while, for a few days. And then I'll kind of start writing, I'll write out an outline of the different factors that I have to find and start writing from the notes what things fit under the categories. And once you start getting to the outline part, I have a pretty good idea of where I'm going because it starts to fall into place once you've given it that much thought.
So for selfish reasons, I'm going to ask you, how can we as divorce lawyers help you do your job better? What are some things that we could do to help you do your job?
Sure. I mean, first of all, I guess I will say I've been so impressed by the family attorneys. I think one thing that most people don't think about, and that I didn't think about until I was in this division for a while, is that I think the family bar is so unique because in almost every practice of law I've ever been in, criminal law and civil law, the practitioners specialize in are always arguing one side or the other. You either have prosecutors or you have defense attorneys. You have plaintiffs' attorneys or you have those that are representing insurance companies or mostly doing defense work. And in the family bar, each person could be arguing a different side of the case each day, depending on who they're representing. So I think that the family law attorneys have a really good sense of cases and issues and do a really good job of understanding where the strengths and the weaknesses of the case are just because of their way of practicing. I think that what I've learned sitting on the other side of the bench for any attorney is just always remember that you know your case better than I do. So some people will start arguing and referring to documents or referring to exhibits or going really deep into issues when I'm still figuring out step 1 and they're talking about step 10. And I'll try to interrupt them and tell them that. You know, having everything clearly labeled and organized. I mean, some of us, that's our strength more than others, just in personal life, but it just helps a judge when you're dealing with complicated issues, having everything in order and keeping track of everything. And understanding what the issues are before you start a long trial.
Know what you want before you approach the bench.
Right, right.
I'm going to shift gears and talk to you a little bit about your public service, because I know that's been a large part of your life. You've done a lot of activities in the community. Can you talk a little bit about that for a while?
Sure. I think that one of the things I've liked the best about being a prosecutor and working in the courtroom my whole career is that I think that it helps keep a really good perspective. I think that every single day that I've walked into a courtroom for my entire career, I'm reminded sometime during the day of how lucky I am for something that I wouldn't otherwise think about. When I was a prosecutor, I remember because when you're young, I was 25 when I started prosecuting, and I remember at first being a little bit shocked, thinking, I never thought about feeling grateful that my parents aren't drug addicts or, you know, that they had constant employment during my youth. I mean, some of the things that the people in our community struggle with, the first time I went to a mental health hearing and I saw someone who was younger than me who was being admitted involuntarily for a mental health issue. It's just nothing that I've ever had to struggle with or a challenge that I've had in life. So we're also lucky that we've come across and have an opportunity to do a lot of public service. So as judges, I've been very lucky. A couple of the judges came up with an internet safety program that we go and give at the middle schools, because one of the issues that I struggle with as a parent, and that almost everyone I know who has tweens and teens these days is struggling with, is how do you talk to your kids about the internet? How do you keep abreast of what's happening? You want to make sure that your child is not giving out personal information. They're not talking to strangers. And what the judges were finding is that everything changes so quickly that you can't necessarily educate the parents. You kind of have to take the message to the kids. So we actually go out and we talk to middle schoolers about not giving out their personal information, about knowing who they're talking to online. Really, our bottom line is think really carefully before you send things so that you're not sending messages that are hurtful to other people. And don't send naked pictures of yourself online, which I hate the fact that we have to say it, but I think it's a reality that I think parents find hard to talk about and that you don't want happening in your house or to your kid. So we do that. I've had an opportunity as a judge and as a prosecutor to talk to Boy Scout groups and Girl Scout groups just about what it's like to be a lawyer and what it's like to be a judge. I've been able to teach at community colleges, doing some mock trial things or some criminal law. I've been involved in the high school mock trial competitions around here. I did some mock trial classes at our elementary school, which is kind of fun. We did the Three Bears scenario, and so they're prosecuting Goldilocks for breaking and entering, and so that's kind of fun. So I just enjoy having an opportunity to do some of those things and just show people what I've learned, because I've been so lucky and I like it so much. So I enjoy that part of it.
Yeah, all that has to shade what you do as a judge, though, I would think, going out into the community and seeing people that are really struggling has to help create empathy for people that are struggling with life in general.
Yeah, I think it's good. I think it's something that I keep trying to talk to my kids about. And like I said, I think, I know you see it every day too. You know, one of my first trials, the first year that I was in family court, was a woman who had kids, my same kids' ages, and the father of her children was in jail, and she had a minimum wage job. And it was very hard to think about, you know, the things that I'm able to afford for my children, that it's just a struggle for her. And I think we all have to keep that in mind.
Mhm. So you've mentioned your kids. How old are they now?
So now I have a 16-year-old and a 12-year-old,
Okay.
two
So
girls.
driver's license?
Yes, yes, she's thrilled to drive.
Yeah. I always loved it when my kids got their driver's license because I could send them to the store to get milk and things like that.
She has been our main grocery delivery lately because she loves to go out and I love the convenience. It's been wonderful. Yeah, I thought I would be really, really nervous, but she's got a pretty level head. So it's been great.
So you had mentioned before some of the things that you like to do. You're a runner,
I
right?
am.
Yeah. And what other things do you do that help you stay sane with your duties?
Yeah, I think for a long time, I struggled with work-life balance, as I think a lot of people do, especially when their kids are young. So I was lucky actually when I was in the civil division, because the nature of that work was much more about writing and about reading and about research, and it could be planned out ahead of time. I was able to work 4 days a week when I was in the civil division and have one day at home to kind of run errands and things. Um, but for me, mostly it's about getting outside as much as I can and just kind of getting away. I have found that although I love the work that I do, that getting into a different environment and getting away from it is really important. So I mentioned before, swimming is a really big, that's I think the most meditative thing I do, and yoga. And then my family likes to, we kayak and we go in the backyard and we do bike. My husband and I went for a bike ride yesterday. We like to travel and just see new places and just kind of get a different perspective on everything. So for us, we tend to be, I think partially because my job, I sit a lot, that for me, the release is being very active when I can.
Your husband's not a lawyer, right?
He's not, he's an engineer.
Okay.
Yeah, totally different brain.
Yeah. And so it sounds like he's really been a partner with you with your career and helped you in terms of moving forward with your career. Is that probably true?
Yeah, I've been lucky. It's funny since we both have completely different ways of looking at things. He's very black and white, as engineers are, and of course lawyers are all about gray. But it's funny. I've been able to go and talk to him sometimes when I've had a very specific science or a math issue. I actually had him help me one time for a trial, try to figure out acceleration when an officer had been basically pacing someone with their squad car and there was an accident. And so I've had him help me with things like that. But especially since I became a judge, my children, as I said, were 5 and 9, or maybe 6, going on 6 and 10 when I became a judge. And he is really, all of a sudden, my life went from being somewhat flexible at work to being. I think the harder thing about being a judge is it's extremely inflexible.
Right.
I can't be the one who necessarily leaves work in the middle of the day to pick up a sick child, or who's going to call in sick when I've got 250 people showing up on a court call. And he has really stepped up in that way to be the parent that could be available for children, because he believes in my job and he believes in how important it is. So that when I took this job on, then he was able to step up and cover some of the things that really wouldn't have been as appropriate for me to cover when I've got people who count on me every day.
It's very hard in our career, I guess in all careers, without having the support of our family, our spouses, parents, kids, etc., to
Yeah,
excel.
I'm very lucky with that. This job in particular, like I said, I think I feel very strongly the duty, and I think most judges do, that you're not going to not show up when people need you to be there. And we're scheduled out, for months. So
So at this point, any regrets about becoming a judge, or you found your happy place, or not happy place, but you know what I mean?
yeah, no, it's funny because I think I told you that when I went into family or divorce court, I mean, it's called family court, but I mostly hear divorce cases, that somebody said to me like, oh, is that kind of depressing? How can you do that? And I actually looked at them and said, well, what's the happy courtroom? Because in court, you are always dealing with things that are hard. Nobody really wants to be in court. We said, except for, we've mentioned adoptions. Um, but I love the challenge of it. I love trying to take things that are kind of chaotic and difficult and are a little bit all over the place and trying to find some sanity in it and some simplicity and trying to bring it together in a way that's logical. I really do enjoy the work. I enjoy dealing with people and working with people. It's been a little bit hard being remote because we don't get a chance to see people face to face, which I find for me is fulfilling. So no, this is where I'd like to stay. If I get an opportunity to do that, I would like to keep serving in this capacity as long as I can.
Yeah, I think a judge can be a healer. And in family court in particular, I think all of our judges see their role in part as helping, trying to heal the family to the extent that you can.
Exactly. Exactly. Just trying to find the best you can for them to help get people to the other side.
Yeah, a friend of mine said there's no winning in family court, but a win can be getting the family out of family court somewhat intact, even though they're not legally a family anymore. They're still a family.
Right. I think for a lot of people, divorce is not necessarily a wrong choice or a bad decision, but it's just figuring out the way to do it that's going to give everybody the best life afterwards that you can.
So I've got to give your division credit. You really were progressive in terms of bringing technology in during the COVID crisis. It's been remarkable what you guys have done. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So as judges, technology is not always our friend, although we do try, definitely. I can say that it's been almost kind of miraculous for me to see as well. We've been very lucky with our chief judge. Just a few weeks into it, I think he saw what the direction that this was going. So in family court, we were lucky that our court calls were very conducive to starting to work off site, because so much of what we do is resolving issues and talking through it with the attorneys back in our chambers, mostly during conferences. So I started off, I think even the first week, calling people for the conferences I had scheduled that week. And at first I started doing phone conferences, and then we all started learning about Zoom. So my first Zoom conferences were always me holding my phone and trying to find a good spot in the house where I wasn't showing off dirty laundry or something, walking around and looking for a plug. And then we all got laptops and we've downloaded the laptops, and then we were starting to do hearings. I actually still have to watch a tutorial on hooking up to YouTube later today. But I think that we want to keep moving. I think we know how important it is that people have an opportunity to be in front of judges and to get their issues resolved. We don't want, in family court especially, if you have two fairly reasonable attorneys or two fairly reasonable parties, they can figure things out on their own. But when you have one person who's really unreasonable and the other person is a victim of that, you don't want to leave those people out there without any way to resolve it. So I think that's been all of our motivation in trying to keep out there and to try to move things forward with email and move things forward remotely as much as we can, is because they're important issues. They're dealing with people's kids and families and finances, and you can't just let it drop for 2 months. So
And I again say from the other side of the bench, it's worked pretty well. I mean, from our point of view, I think it's worked very well, actually.
yeah, from our point of view too. I mean, every once in a while there's been a little glitch or frustration, but for the most part, knock on wood. Well, I would love to get back to normal, but I have a feeling that this is going to be a part of it. I think that there's some great things that could come out of it. There's a lot of my court call where I've had people say, like, Judge, I took off an entire day for this, or they've been sitting in court for a couple hours because my courtroom's so busy. attorneys that have to run from place to place. And so I think that there's going to be a place even in the future that we can use technology to make this process easier, and hopefully still have some personal contact.
And I personally believe it will help the public as well. It will be less expensive if I have a 10-minute Zoom status with you as opposed to driving to the courthouse for an hour. So.
Right, and they don't have to drag their children, and they don't have to, get dressed up, or they don't have to, some people, take a bus to the judicial center, and so that won't have to happen either.
So you are running for, you're a circuit judge now, right? The Supreme Court appointed you last
Yeah.
year?
Last August.
Okay, and you are looking, you're running for that position at this point, correct?
Yeah, so a lot of people, it's kind of, I didn't pay attention to this until I was already a judge. As I said before, the circuit judges appoint the associate judges. So I was an appointed judge. And then the circuit judges are the elected judges. The circuit judges are kind of the supervisors of the court system at the state level, because they decide on, they get together in meetings and they appoint the associate judges. We just appointed a new public defender, and I was part of that vote. And they kind of do the decision-making for the general policies of the courtrooms and the courthouse. They choose the chief judge. So after being an associate for 7 years, I was interested in being a circuit judge. So when one of the judges retired, because there was so long until the election, they couldn't leave the spot open because there's work to be done. So the Supreme Court had an opportunity to, upon someone retiring, to appoint someone to that position for the interim. And so they appointed me, which was a great honor, and also a little scary, because that means that I gave up my position of being an associate judge to become a circuit judge. So now I need to win the election in order to remain in this spot and to remain a judge at this time.
So you're actually running like I guess a politician, for lack of a better word, has to run for an office, correct?
Correct, yeah.
This is not a political position.
Yeah, that's, I think, one thing that's been frustrating and eye-opening about this is that judges in Illinois are required to run in a political race. We're in the general election, so we have to run under a political party. We're one of only 13 states that still requires judges to run in a partisan election. Most states allow judges to run kind of like mayors as nonpartisan, or the judges are only appointed. So I think that's one thing I would really like to see changed in the future. I know it's been tried before, and I would like to reopen the investigation and see if we could change the law to allow judges to run nonpartisan. I think that when you really think about it, there's no decision that's being made inside the courtroom that ever has anything to do with politics. As trial judges in Illinois, we decide if people are guilty or innocent of crimes. We decide evidentiary issues. We decide divorce cases. We deal with probate issues and small claims and lawsuits. And none of that has anything to do with the types of political questions that most people think of when they think of Republican or Democrat. As judges, we're ethically barred from allowing our personal or political decisions to affect a case. So it's a shame that people would choose a judge thinking that they're choosing a judge based on political party or based on labels, when that's not what the job is about.
I think
Politicians advocate for policy, but we don't.
Yeah, I mentioned to you when I had talked to you about setting this up, about our Chief Justice, John Roberts, who referred to himself as calling balls and strikes.
Right.
That's not really a political position. That's calling balls and strikes.
Yeah, we're kind of umpires in the legal world. We follow the law, we don't make the law. So we enforce the rules, but we don't make the rules. And as judges, we know that. We know our power is to look at what the law is, to read it, to research it, to figure it out, and then to apply it, not apply our own values in the courtroom.
So if somebody is evaluating a candidate for judge, they're really looking more at their character and their accomplishments and their experience. That's really the sort of thing that would govern what makes a good judge or not. Am I off base on that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think your experience would tell you what you look for in a judge. I think if you took off the labels, that you would look for merit. I mean, I think that that's how anybody should be judged. Like I said, I understand if you're choosing someone who's going to legislate, then you want to know what their political beliefs are, because that's what you expect you're voting for, is someone who's going to advocate for those positions. But if you're choosing someone who has to be an expert in the area of law and an expert in the courtroom, then you want to look at, is that person an expert in the law or the courtroom, and how do they conduct themselves, and do they have the type of character to deal with the type of authority that they're being given. And those are really the only things I think that would matter if you took off all the labels. I think that those are the important things for being a good judge.
I would agree with that. We're going to wrap it up.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask you this. So if you weren't a judge, what career would you like?
Sure. So every once in a while, especially at this time of year, I would probably be a teacher. Maybe someday I'll go back to doing that in retirement. But I have been lucky to have a few positions where I've been able to teach in life. In undergraduate at University of Illinois, I was an ice skating instructor, which was a very bizarre job to have. Somebody I knew did it. It was paid by the hour. It wasn't a tuition waiver, but I had taken a bunch of ice skating lessons. So I actually taught a college level ice skating class all 4 years of undergrad to make money that way. And then I was able to be a business law teacher. And I think what that does, it's almost the same work as a courtroom, where you take a complicated topic, you pare it down to what you really need to tell someone else about it for them to understand it. And then you're able to connect with someone else to communicate that. And so I think that that's what I like about being in the courtroom. That's what I liked about litigating. That's what I like about being a judge. And so that's what I like about teaching, is when I've done that, it gives you the opportunity to think through how you're going to explain it to someone else, and then to help someone else. And so someday I'll get back to that. But otherwise, I do like the fact that being a judge has some aspect to that, when you're explaining to people why you're ruling a certain way.
You're helping people in both jobs.
Right. And trying to educate them about the system.
Well, on behalf of the bar, I want to thank you for all of your contributions to our profession and your hard work. I honestly, I'm not just telling you this, I've never seen somebody work as hard as you work. And it sounds like from this interview, you've been doing that back to college days, working 3 jobs, and you stay busy.
Yeah, I guess it's in my nature somehow. I'm kind of driven, but I think I'm happier when I'm busy. I think that's one thing I found, is I like to just keep moving.
Yes. Well, again, thank you, and stay on the line. I'm going to turn off the recording, and thanks again.